Why did she not look up? Why, when laughter rippled through the crucible and the sneers of men aimed to crush her presence, did she remain silent, wrapping her hands as though nothing in the world mattered? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud no one yet recognized. It was the sort of silence that didn't suggest weakness but something else, something unnerving, yet none of them saw it. None but one. From the upper deck, General Hayes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He didn't look at the cadets or the arrogant ringleader in the center of the noise. He looked only at her hands. The scars told a story. Thin, silvery lines across the knuckles, not from clumsy accidents or careless training but from repetition, thousands of hours of strikes, parries, grips, and breaks. The way her weight distributed on the floor, not heavy but balanced, spoke of economy. She wasted nothing, a predator in stillness. But on the floor below, Cadet Sergeant Marcus Thorne saw none of this. He only saw opportunity. His chest swelled, broad shoulders squared, the posture of a man who believed he was the sun around which every orbit bent. His voice cut the hum of the training hall. "Look what we have here, boys. Another diversity hire sent to lower the standards." The laughter came fast, sharp, sycophantic. His shadows, Jenkins and Ali, echoed it loudest, eager to be seen, eager to stay in his orbit. Her silence deepened. She taped her left hand, then pulled the band tight, pressing it flat with deliberate calm. Not a glance in his direction, not even the twitch of an eye. "Seriously, sweetheart," Thorne pressed, stepping closer. "Did you get lost on your way to the admin building? This is where warriors train. Can't have you breaking a nail." The laughter swelled again, but thinner this time. Because silence in the wrong place at the wrong time begins to feel dangerous. Some cadets shifted. Their faces betrayed unease, but no one spoke. No one stepped forward. They'd been taught, whether by the institution or by fear, that silence was safer when you weren't the target. Only Hayes saw the shift of her hips. Not away, not defensive, preparatory. What did she know that they did not? The truth was simple. She knew something they couldn't imagine, something she hadn't told them, not yet. She began the right hand now, wrapping each fold like ritual. Her world didn't include Thorne's performance, his audience, or his arrogance. To her, it was just white tape against skin, the methodical rhythm of preparation. That dismissal was worse than any insult. It cut deeper than words. It told him he was irrelevant. The flush in his face betrayed him. He'd set out to humiliate her, to make her an example. Instead, he was unraveling. The crucible, the hall of tests, sweat and ambition grew heavy. The air thickened. Violence hummed unsaid. Master Sergeant Croft, the instructor, stood to the side, unmoved. His job wasn't to intervene. His job was to forge warriors, and the forge burned hottest when left unchecked. Then Croft barked, "Listen up, final evaluation, king of the hill, last three standing get my recommendation, the rest, logistics." The room shifted instantly. Nerves surged, adrenaline spiked. Months of grinding training, all boiling down to this. Before Croft even finished, Thorne's hand shot up. "I'll go first, Sergeant." His finger pointed like a spear at her. "And I'll take the new candidate." Cheers from his small circle, a few uneasy murmurs from the rest. Croft's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the arrogance, but Thorne had earned a reputation. Powerhouse, sharp technique, dominant in sparring. The kind of cadet instructors expected to go far. This call-out was reckless, but Croft allowed it. "Vance, you're up." She pressed the last edge of tape flat against her hand. The sound was soft but final. Then she stood. It was the first time many really saw her. She was not tall, not imposing, but compact, muscle coiled tight, posture aligned like a drawn bow, nothing wasted, nothing hidden. She walked forward without hurry. The fluidity was strange, as if she wasn't walking but gliding, each step so precise it drew no sound. The crowd hushed without meaning to. Thorne rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, bouncing like a fighter on stage. He wanted them watching. He needed them watching. She didn't look at the crowd. For her, there was only the mat, the space between bodies, the geometry of angles, leverage, distance. Her breathing slowed, even controlled, a rhythm that didn't belong in the fever of the crucible. What was she thinking? They wondered, was she scared? But fear doesn't move like that. Fear doesn't breathe like that. Thorne surged forward before thought could take root in the room. No bell, no signal, just raw aggression, a bellow tearing from his chest. His right fist swung, a hammer meant to crush, to humiliate, to end it before it began. The cadets braced for the impact. They'd seen this before. He was fast, brutal. But the impact never came. Because she wasn't there. At the last instant her body shifted, 15 degrees, a pivot so small it seemed impossible. His fist tore through empty air. Her left hand cupped his elbow, fingers precise, finding nerve. Her right hand brushed his hip. Not force, redirection. He stumbled forward, his own momentum betraying him. Confusion flashed in his eyes as he caught himself, turned and roared. He charged again, wild now, technique collapsing. He didn't see it, didn't know he'd already lost. She slid beneath his arm, seized his wrist, pivoted across his body, and dropped her center of gravity. The throw was flawless. For an instant he was weightless. Then the mat thundered under his back. Her knee pinned his shoulder, her arms locking his in a hold that threatened to break him with a whisper of pressure. It was over. 3 seconds, no punch thrown, no word spoken. She had not fought him, she had disassembled him. The silence was deafening. Thorne's arrogance shattered on the mat beneath him. His whisper carried to every ear, "That's not possible." Footsteps echoed from above, measured, deliberate. The general descended. The air seemed to tighten with every step. Hayes walked past cadets frozen in shock, past Thorne sprawled in disbelief. His eyes locked only on her. "Textbook Krav Maga parry," he said, calm, analyzing. "But that takedown, that was pure systema. You don't learn that here. Who trained you?" For the first time she spoke, clear, even. "Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne, sir, my father." The cadets rippled with confusion. The general did not. He knew the name. Every warrior did. A living legend of close combat, a ghost within the ranks. Croft, ordered by Hayes, pulled her record. His voice trembled as he read. "Navy Service, Chief Petty Officer, SEAL Development Group, Tier 1 Operator, Navy Cross, Silver Stars, Purple Heart." The litany went on. Every word struck like thunder. The cadets stared. The same mouths that had mocked her hung open now in awe. Jenkins and Ali looked as though the ground might swallow them whole. When Croft finished, Hayes turned back to her. His salute was crisp, deliberate, heavy with respect reserved only for the rarest warriors. "Chief Vance, an honor to have you here." She returned the salute. And the crucible, this hall of arrogance, noise, and bravado, was never the same again. That night the story spread through barracks and mess halls like wildfire. Thorne had been dismantled in 3 seconds. The general had saluted her, and the quiet, unassuming woman had been a ghost all along. Her silence had rewritten the crucible. And yet what the cadets didn't know, what she hadn't told them, was that silence was not just her weapon. It was her shield, and behind it was a weight none of them could yet see. Because scars don't end at the skin. Why did no one speak? Why, when the truth lay heavy as stone in the crucible, did every cadet swallow their voice? The silence that followed her reveal was different from the silence that preceded it. Before, it had been born of arrogance, of a room waiting for humiliation to fall on the newcomer. Now, it was awe. A silence no one wanted to break, because in it lingered the echo of something they hadn't seen before, quiet mastery. For Marcus Thorne, it was worse than silence. It was exposure. He sat on the mat, still stunned, still pinned by memory. He'd spent months carving out dominance in this place, building his identity on strength, on performance, on noise. and in less than 3 seconds she had undone it. Not just beaten him, but dismantled him. His fists, his voice, his swagger, none of it mattered. He was nothing against the stillness she carried. He avoided her eyes. He avoided everyone's eyes. General Hayes dismissed the cadets, his tone curt. Returned to barracks, dismissed. The room broke apart in uneven fragments. No laughter now. No taunts. Only murmurs, tight whispers traveling faster than footsteps. Jenkins and Ali stayed quiet, their bodies stiff, as though silence might cloak their shame. They didn't dare meet her gaze. Their smirks from earlier had curdled into something worse, fear. Vance said nothing. She unwound the tape from her hands, coiling it neatly, pressing it flat. Every motion exact, as though nothing that had happened carried weight enough to interrupt ritual. Then she walked out. No fanfare, no eye contact, no satisfaction. Only silence. And yet, as she moved through the corridors, cadets pressed back against the walls. Not out of courtesy, out of instinct. She walked through their assumptions as if she were invisible, but they felt her presence all the same. In the mess hall that night, the story spread. Rumors sharpened, details exaggerated. She didn't even throw a punch. Thorne flew across the mat like a rag doll. Hayes saluted her. By the time the tale reached the far barracks, she had grown into a specter, some calling her the ghost, others simply whispering the chief. Vance ate alone. She always did. She sat at the far corner, her tray balanced, her back against the wall, not defensive. Habit. Years of instinct told her not to leave her back open in a room full of strangers. She chewed slowly, eyes down, as though the world had not shifted on its axis. But inside, something churned. She hadn't come here for attention. She hadn't come to make a spectacle. She had come to disappear, to sink into the rhythm of training, to blend. But now the crucible knew her name. She felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. She hated it. Recognition wasn't strength, it was exposure, and exposure was danger. Her hand brushed the scar at her side, hidden beneath fatigues. A memory burned there, one she never spoke of. It ached with ghosts. Across the mess, Thorne sat rigid, his tray untouched, his friends silent. The laughter that had once circled him like armor was gone. He stared at the table, jaw tight, pulse hammering. He'd built himself on the illusion of invincibility, and in 3 seconds she had shown him the truth. He was fragile. He clenched his fists under the table, nails digging into his palms until they hurt. Rage and shame twisted together, but deeper than both was something worse, recognition. She had seen him, not just defeated him, seen him. And that was unbearable. That night, sleep didn't come easy for anyone. In the barracks, cadets whispered in their bunks. What else was she hiding? Why was someone like her even here? The questions spread like wildfire, feeding the mystery. Some feared her. Some admired her. A few, quietly, wanted to learn from her. Thorne lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Every second of the fight replayed, frame by frame. The moment her hands touched his elbow, her hip. The moment gravity betrayed him. He had never felt so powerless. He closed his eyes, but the silence of the crucible returned. It wasn't just silence, it was judgment. And somewhere in the shadows of memory, his father's voice echoed. Strength isn't loud, Marcus. It's controlled. If you can't control yourself, you'll lose to someone who can. He had laughed at those words once. Now they cut. At dawn, training resumed. The cadets lined up on the field, faces stiff, eyes restless. The instructors barked orders, push-ups, runs, drills, but there was an invisible shift. Where once the noise of competition filled the air, grunts, boasts, jeers, now there was caution, watchfulness. They stole glances at her. She moved through exercises with quiet precision, neither first nor last. Her push-ups were even, her pull-ups steady, her breathing controlled. Nothing flamboyant, nothing showy. But nothing wasted. Thorne felt it like a shadow. Every rep he forced himself through, he felt her in the periphery, not mocking, not even watching, but present. And the presence weighed heavier than any insult. By midday, the whispers had reached the instructors. Master Sergeant Croft heard them in the gym, the shooting range, the chow line, the ghost, the chief. The dev grew vet. He kept his expression flat, but inside he was unsettled. He had seen talent before. He had trained prodigies, but she wasn't talent. She was something else, something already forged, already tempered. Why was she here? The question gnawed. That evening in his office, Hayes stared at her file again. The words glowed on the tablet screen: Navy Cross, silver stars, purple heart, Tier 1. He rubbed his temples. Vance wasn't here by accident. She was here because someone somewhere had placed her here, and not for training. For observation, for purpose. The thought tightened his chest. What purpose? Meanwhile, Vance stood alone in the range, a rifle balanced in her hands. Not shooting, just holding, breathing. Her finger rested light on the trigger guard, eyes steady on the target. Her silence wasn't peace, it was armor. Because she knew this wouldn't end with one fight. She knew the crucible had only begun to test her. And the real battle wasn't with fists or ranks. The real battle was with herself. For silence is easy when you've built it on scars. But scars, if left unspoken, have a way of speaking back. And deep in the quiet of that range, Vance heard them. Why did the crucible feel different now? Why did every cadet move through the day as though something invisible pressed on them? The answer was simple. Her silence had reshaped the air. By the third morning, even the instructors noticed it. The usual bravado, the shouts during drills, the swagger between sets, the crude jokes had dulled. Now, cadets watched each other more carefully. They studied stance, timing, breath. They had learned through her example that noise wasn't strength, that competence wasn't loud. And yet she never asked to be their teacher. Vance ran her laps with quiet precision. Her stride was steady, economical, almost machine-like. She lifted with rhythm, never pausing, never showing strain, but never indulging in showmanship either. She seemed untouched by fatigue, yet never flaunted it. The cadets whispered anyway. She's the ghost. She was Dev Grew. Tier 1. Some whispered in awe, others whispered in fear. A few whispered in resentment, angry that she had shattered the hierarchy, furious that she had proved them wrong simply by existing. Marcus Thorne heard every whisper. He felt them like knives. For years he had been the golden boy of this academy, the one others watched, the one they measured themselves against. Now his name was mentioned only in the shadow of hers. He hated her for it, and yet deep down something twisted worse than hate: admiration. Because even in defeat, even in humiliation, he had seen something in her, something terrifying and undeniable: control. During weapons training that week, the shift became more obvious. The cadets lined up on the range, rifles tight in their shoulders, breathing uneven as the instructors barked. Most pulled their triggers with jittery impatience. Shots went wide, groupings scattered. Then it was her turn. Vance stepped forward, adjusted her stance, exhaled. Her finger brushed the trigger as though coaxing it, not forcing it. 5 shots, measured, soft. The report of each echoed evenly across the range. When the instructor called the targets back, her grouping was a perfect surgical cluster, dead center. The silence on the line was heavier than the sound of the shots. She stepped back, weapon clear, face impassive, not a word. And yet, without trying, she taught them. Some cadets adjusted their grips, mimicking the subtle angle of her shoulders. Others slowed their breathing, copying the rhythm they had watched in her chest. Even Thorne noticed. His jaw clenched as he tried it, steadying his aim, matching his breath. His shots landed closer than before. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Vance didn't notice, or maybe she did and she chose not to care. That night in the barracks, the whispers grew. She shot perfect. Not a flinch. She doesn't miss. Some cadets started asking her quiet questions, at first hesitant. Chief, How do you keep your hand steady? How do you fight breathing? Her answers were short, precise. Grip tighter with your left. Exhale, then hold. Don't fight the breath, use it. No speeches, no indulgence, just the truth. And still, her silence taught more than words ever could. But silence, left too long, becomes its own kind of noise. General Hayes saw it happening. He watched as the cadets leaned toward her, gravitated toward her quiet strength. He knew what he was seeing: influence. And influence in the wrong hands could shift everything. That evening, he summoned her. In his office, lit by the dim yellow of a desk lamp, he studied her. She stood at attention, posture exact, eyes forward. "You've disrupted the crucible," Hayes said. His voice wasn't harsh, more curious. "Do you understand that?" Her reply was simple: "No intent to, sir." "And yet you did." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Why are you here, Vance?" For the first time, her eyes flickered, a hesitation. Why was she here? She had asked herself the same question 100 times since stepping into this academy. She could have been retired. She could have been gone, vanished into anonymity. She could have lived quietly with the ghosts she carried. But instead, she was here. Her voice, when it came, was measured. "Orders, sir." Hayes didn't buy it. He saw the weight in her eyes, the truth that orders alone couldn't explain. "You're not here to prove yourself," he said. "You've already done that. You're here for something else, something you haven't said." She didn't answer. Silence again, her shield. But in her silence, Hayes heard it: conflict. He dismissed her with a nod, but as she turned, he spoke again. "Be careful, Vance. Silence is powerful, but sometimes silence is its own burden." That night, alone in her bunk, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Hayes's words rang in her mind. Silence is powerful, but it is also heavy. Her chest ached where old scars pulled. Scars no one saw, not on her knuckles, not on her side, deeper scars. She remembered faces, voices, the sound of a helicopter rotors thumping against a night sky, a mission that had ended in fire, brothers she couldn't save. And the silence afterward, the kind that follows when names are carved on stone. She pressed her eyes shut, breathed, tried to let it go. But silence doesn't erase, silence remembers. Meanwhile, Thorne was fighting his own ghosts. The humiliation clung to him, but beneath it, something else grew. He found himself watching her during drills, not with the same arrogance as before, but with a gnawing hunger to understand. He mimicked her movements, slowed his breathing, steadied his rhythm. And though pride resisted, part of him whispered the truth. She was better, and if he ever wanted to be more than noise, he needed to learn. But could he? Could arrogance reshape into humility? Or was he too far gone, too bound to the image he had built of himself? The crucible was no longer about who was strongest. It was no longer about noise or bravado or performance. It was about who could listen in silence. And Vance, though she never asked for it, had become the silent center of everything. But what no one yet knew, what she refused to show, was that silence was cracking. That every night when the lights went out and the whispers faded, she heard voices of her own. Voices of the fallen. And silence, no matter how strong, can only hold so long before it begins to break. Why did the crucible feel colder that morning, though the sun burned hot above the field? Why did every cadet carry an edge of tension in their steps, as if waiting for something to break? It wasn't the drills, it wasn't the instructors, it was her. Our advance had become gravity without meaning to. Wherever she moved, silence followed. Wherever she stood, cadets recalibrated themselves, not by choice but by instinct. They mimicked her breathing on the range, her stance during close combat, her pace on long runs. No one declared her a leader. She never asked to be one. But the crucible had already chosen. That morning, Master Sergeant Croft announced a new test. Evasion exercise, pairs, one hunter, one hunted. You'll have 30 minutes to track or escape. Success means control. Failure means weakness, and weakness earns no recommendation. The cadets broke into teams, nervous chatter echoing through the tree line that bordered the training field. They disappeared in twos, boots thudding against dirt, hearts pounding against time. Vance walked forward slowly, her name called without hesitation. Croft's eyes flickered. You'll hunt. Her partner chosen by the lot was Marcus Thorne. The silence that followed cracked like glass. Some cadets smirked, expecting a repeat humiliation. Others winced, sensing the cruelty of the pairing. Thorne himself stiffened, jaw clenching, shame still raw from the mat. He looked at her. She looked past him as though he were no more than air. Croft's bark broke the tension. Go. Thorne plunged into the woods first, body crashing through brush, lungs hammering. His pride burned with every step. He had dreamed of this moment since the fight, of reclaiming something, of proving he wasn't just noise. Behind him, Vance followed, not with speed, not with sound. She moved like shadow. Her steps were soft, her breathing measured, her eyes scanning angles, lines of movement, disturbances in the ground. She didn't track him as a cadet would. She tracked him as a hunter. Within minutes, she had him in sight, half hidden behind a fallen tree, chest heaving, sweat glistening on his neck. He thought he'd been clever, looping around, masking his path. He hadn't realized every broken twig, every displaced leaf was a flare in her eyes. She could have ended it then, but she didn't. Instead, she waited, watching. Why? Because she saw something in him that unsettled her. Not arrogance now, not swagger, but desperation. He wanted this, not to humiliate her, but to survive himself. And in that, she saw a reflection she didn't want. Because she too knew desperation. The kind that drives you when survival is the only option. The kind that claws inside you long after the mission ends. Memories pressed in. She tried to shove them away. But the forest brought them back, the smell of pine, the crunch of earth. It was too close to another place, another night. She saw flashes. A compound in black mountains, fire streaking against the sky, the bodies of brothers in arms sprawled in silence. Her hand pressed against a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, her voice shouting into the dark for medevac that never came. And then the silence that followed when names were folded into flags. Her chest tightened, her eyes closed. She could break Thorne now, but breaking him wouldn't silence her ghosts. Instead, she stepped out, deliberate, no ambush, no strike. Thorne whipped around, startled. He raised his fists, shoulders squared. Come on, he panted, anger mixing with shame. Fight me fair, no tricks this time. She stood still, her hands lowered, her voice was flat. Not everything is solved with a fight. The words hit him harder than any strike. Because in them, he heard what he had never been told. That his strength was not strength at all, just noise covering emptiness. But pride flared. He lunged anyway, fists swinging wild. She sidestepped, redirecting, letting his weight collapse against gravity. In seconds, he was on the ground again, pinned by his own momentum. But she didn't hold him, she released him. Why? He gasped, furious. She looked down at him, eyes steady but heavy with something he couldn't name. Because I don't need to prove anything to you. Her words weren't cruel, they weren't dismissive, they were true. And truth was the sharpest cut. When they returned to the crucible, Croft's eyes narrowed at the outcome. Result. Evaded, she said simply. Thorne said nothing, he couldn't. The cadets whispered again, but this time the whispers weren't only about her. They were about him, about the way his shoulders slumped, about the look in his eyes. He had lost twice now, not only to her hands but to her silence. That night he didn't eat, he didn't laugh, he didn't speak. He lay in his bunk, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of something he'd never known before, humility. And humility hurt more than defeat. Vance, in her own bunk across the hall, stared at the ceiling. Her silence was heavier now too. Hayes's words returned, gnawing. Silence is powerful, but silence is also a burden. And she felt the burden. Every time her eyes closed, she saw them. The brothers she'd lost, the night that had burned her soul. She pressed her palms against her eyes, whispering into the dark. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a breath, an attempt to quiet the ghosts. But silence never answers back. The next morning, training resumed. New drills, new sweat, the cycle of discipline unbroken. But something had shifted. Because now cadets began turning to her not only with questions but with presence. They ran closer to her pace, lifted beside her station, sparred with a nervous respect. She didn't seek it, she didn't want it, but it came anyway. And in their eyes she saw something she feared: reliance. Because she knew she wasn't their savior. She was a scarred shadow, carrying ghosts they couldn't bear to know. And if they looked too close, if they followed too far, they'd see the cracks she hid beneath silence. Yet even cracks can teach, even scars can guide. And without intending it, arrogance was becoming more than just the ghost of the crucible. She was becoming its mirror. A mirror in which every cadet, even Marcus Thorne, was forced to see themselves, not the noise they made, but the truth beneath it. And truth, like silence, is not easy to face. Why did the crucible grow quieter with each passing day, though no order had been given to silence? It was because her presence had changed its rhythm. Where once the air rang with boasting and laughter, with the sharp clatter of egos colliding, now there was only the sound of discipline, feet striking the ground in steady rhythm, breath measured, movements sharper, more economical. Arrogance had not asked for it. She had not spoken into it, but the cadets had begun to recalibrate themselves by her example. It unnerved her. She didn't come here to lead. She didn't come to inspire. She came here to disappear, to bury her ghosts in the noise of drills, to drown her silence in other voices. And yet, the more she tried to fade, the more visible she became. On the obstacle course that morning, cadets who once cheered the loudest now moved with a strange focus. They studied her hands as she climbed the ropes, her balance as she shifted weight over the wall, the way her breathing never stuttered. She never aimed to be first, but she was never far behind. And without fanfare, she set the pace for them all. Marcus Thorne felt it most. He climbed behind her, his muscles straining, his mind locked not on beating her, but on matching her rhythm. Every step he forced himself to take steady, controlled. He gritted his teeth, fighting the instinct to power through with brute strength. She reached the top of the wall, paused just long enough to secure her grip, then moved over with a fluid motion that seemed effortless. Thorne followed, slower, clumsier, but steadier than before. He landed on the ground hard, rolling his ankle slightly, wincing. But he didn't roar in frustration. He just breathed, steadying himself. For the first time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to learn. And that was new. The cadets saw it too. The once untouchable Thorne was no longer posturing, no longer mocking. He moved differently now, quieter, his eyes sharper, his voice subdued. Some whispered that he was broken. Others whispered that maybe he was changing. That night in the mess hall, Thorne did something unthinkable. He didn't sit with Jenkins or Ali. He sat alone at the edge of the table. And after a long hesitation, he carried his tray across the room, placing it quietly across from her. The hall stilled, forks froze, conversation stumbled. Vance looked up once, eyes gray and unreadable, then back down to her meal. Thorne swallowed hard, his throat dry. He hated how nervous he felt. "Chief," he said quietly, the word awkward in his mouth, "can I ask you something?" She didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, a test he didn't understand but felt all the same. Finally she spoke, her tone flat. "If it's about fighting me again, save your breath." He shook his head quickly. "No, not that," he hesitated. "I want to know how you keep your composure out there, in here, everywhere. You don't flinch, you don't break. How?" Her fork paused, barely halfway to her mouth. For a moment something flickered in her eyes, something he couldn't name. Then it was gone. "Discipline," she said simply. "That's it." She set her fork down, her gaze meeting his. Her voice lowered, each word precise. "Discipline isn't a word, it's a life. It's every choice when no one's watching. It's how you breathe when your hands shake. It's how you move when you're out of strength. It's the silence you keep when screaming would be easier. You think it's strength, cadet. It's not. It's refusal." Her words landed heavy, not just on him, but on the cadets who strained to overhear. He stared at her, realizing for the first time that strength wasn't what he thought it was. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't dominance. It was something colder, heavier, lonelier. "Why would you choose that?" he asked, almost whispering. For the first time her mask cracked. Her eyes darkened, her jaw tightened. "Because sometimes, cadet, there is no choice." She stood, tray in hand, and walked away. He sat frozen, her words echoing, knowing he had touched something he didn't understand. That night Vance lay awake in her bunk. The whispers had grown louder, but it wasn't the cadets' voices she heard. It was her own past, pressing hard against the silence she fought to hold. She saw them again, the brothers who had bled beside her, the missions no one spoke of. She saw the faces that never came home, the weight of their last breaths in her hands. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to block it out, but the images clung like smoke. Why was she here? She had told Hayes it was orders, and yes, technically that was true. But deep down, she knew the truth was darker. She was here because she wasn't finished. Because the silence of civilian life had been worse than the silence of the crucible. Because ghosts followed you home, and sometimes the only way to live with them was to keep moving. She hadn't come to lead. She hadn't come to inspire. She had come to survive herself. And yet, every day, the cadets looked at her as though she were something more. The next week, the crucible threw them into a survival drill. 3 days in the field with nothing but packs, maps, and grit. The instructors barked orders, then vanished, leaving the cadets to stumble through the forest. By nightfall, the group was fracturing. Some fought over rations, others panicked over lost bearings. The tension spread like fire. Vance said nothing. She sat at the base of a tree, tying a knot in her rope, eyes calm. But when the arguments rose too loud, she finally spoke. "Water's downhill, food in the branches, cold's worse if you sit still." The cadets froze, her voice cutting clean through the noise. Slowly they followed her lead, gathering water, collecting berries, building shelter. She gave no speeches, no commands, just directions, soft, factual, undeniable. And by morning they had survived, not because of Croft, not because of Thorne, not because of luck, because of her. Whispers spread again, not ghost now, something else. Some began calling her chief openly, not as a title but as acknowledgement. She hated it, she didn't want it, but she didn't stop it. Because deep down she knew, sometimes silence wasn't enough. Sometimes others forced you to speak. And each word she gave them was another weight on her chest, another crack in her armor. Meanwhile, Thorne wrestled harder. Each day he felt himself slipping further from who he'd been. He hated it, and yet he couldn't stop. He found himself watching her, not with envy now, but with a gnawing desire to understand, to change. But could he change? Could arrogance be burned away by humility, or was he too marked by the noise he had once worshipped? The crucible would decide. Because the tests were growing harder, the shadows of their pasts heavier. And arrogance knew, silence could only hold so long before it cracked. Why did the instructors stay so quiet that morning? Why did Croft and Hayes both stand at the edge of the crucible with their arms folded, saying little, their eyes harder than usual? The cadets sensed it. The air was wrong. Something heavier was coming. Croft barked at last. Final field trial before evaluations. 48 hours, no barracks, no safety nets. Simulated combat scenario, full load. If you fail, you're done. If you break, you're gone. Last chance to prove you belong here." The words landed like iron. Cadets swallowed hard, their bodies stiffening. They had been through drills before, long runs, sparring matches, survival treks, but something in Croft's tone told them this was different. When the trucks dropped them in the forest, dusk already creeping across the sky, the truth set in. Packs heavy, rifles slung, cold cutting sharper with each passing hour. And no instructors in sight. Just the woods, just the silence. They pushed forward in teams, stumbling through underbrush, tripping over roots, nerves raw. The scenario was simple on paper. Navigate to checkpoints, defend against ambushes, keep your team alive. But paper didn't bleed, paper didn't starve. By midnight they were cold, wet, and fraying. Tempers sparked. Jenkins cursed loudly when his boots sank in mud. Ali snapped back, accusing him of slowing the pace. The noise of panic spread quick, until her voice cut through. "Quiet." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it stopped them all. Vance crouched near the ground, hand brushing damp leaves. Her eyes scanned the tree line, her head tilting as if listening to something they couldn't hear. "Movement," she murmured. They froze, rifles rising. For long moments, nothing. Then a sharp crack of paint rounds ripped through the dark, exploding against bark. Instructors ambushed teams, hidden, ruthless, driving chaos into the cadets' veins. Panic erupted. Cadets fired wildly, breaking formation, stumbling over each other. Only she stayed calm. "Left flank," she ordered softly, her hand motioning, not shouting. Thorne, closest to her, obeyed first without thinking. He shifted left, eyes scanning, and to his shock he spotted it, the faint gleam of a visor in the shadows. He took his shot. The enemy crumpled, marked out. His chest surged with something strange. Not pride, not arrogance, something steadier, trust. The cadets followed her signals, hesitant at first, then faster, moving like pieces of a puzzle they hadn't known they were part of. Within minutes, the ambush was broken, the woods falling silent again. They breathed hard, chests heaving, hearts pounding. She lowered her rifle, calm as if none of it touched her. But inside it had. Because the chaos of the ambush, the crack of rounds, the way the cadets panicked, it had dragged her somewhere else, somewhere darker. She was back on that mountain, hearing the screams, the thump of helicopters that never came. She was back holding a brother's hand slick with blood, whispering lies she wished were true. "You'll make it. Stay with me. Just stay." Her hand trembled just for an instant. She clenched it tight on the rifle, forcing the ghosts down. No one noticed except Thorne. He saw the flicker in her hand, the shadow in her eyes. But he said nothing. By dawn, exhaustion had sunk deep. Cadets staggered, hungry, bruised, feet raw. The forest tested more than muscle, it tested will. They reached a clearing, setting up makeshift cover. And there, Croft's voice boomed over loudspeakers hidden in the trees. "Casualty simulation. One of you is down. Treat, carry, extract. Fail, and you fail as a team." Ali fell to the ground, playing the role. Blood packs burst against his chest, red soaking his fatigues. His groans filled the clearing. The cadets froze. Training told them what to do. Fear told them not to move. Until she stepped forward. "Pressure here," she instructed, pressing hands to Ali's wound. "Bandage, tourniquet." Her voice was steady, clipped, efficient. And then it wasn't training anymore. Her breath hitched. Her hands pressed harder than they needed to, because in her mind it wasn't Ali, it was someone else. Someone long gone. The forest blurred. She heard the radio static of that night, the unanswered calls, the final silence. Her heart pounded, her vision narrowed. But she forced herself back. "Move," she snapped at Jenkins, startling him into action. "Carry him." The cadets stumbled, lifting Ali onto a makeshift stretcher. They moved through the clearing, Vance at the front, her pace relentless, her eyes scanning for more threats. When they finally reached the checkpoint, collapsing in sweat and mud, Croft's voice returned. Simulation complete. Relief rippled through the cadets. Some cheered weakly, others dropped flat, groaning. Vance stepped aside, wiping her hands against her fatigues, her eyes hollow. Because for her it hadn't been simulation, it had been memory. Thorne approached quietly, his usual confidence gone. He crouched near her, his voice low. That wasn't just training, was it? She didn't look at him. Stay in your lane, cadet. But he didn't move. I saw your hand, I saw your eyes, that wasn't here, you were somewhere else. Her jaw clenched, silence stretched. Finally her voice came, sharp but brittle. You don't want to know where I've been. He wanted to push, to ask, but something in her tone stopped him, something raw, almost broken. For the first time he realized she wasn't unshakable, she wasn't untouchable, she was scarred, deeply. And somehow that made her stronger. That night when the cadets huddled in makeshift shelters, too tired to talk, Thorne sat awake staring at the stars. All his life he had thought strength meant noise. He had thought power meant domination. But she had shown him something else, something harder, something lonelier. And for the first time, he wondered if he had the courage to change. Vance, lying in the dark with her rifle beside her, stared at the tree line, her body still, her mind loud. She heard the voices of the lost. She felt the silence pressing on her chest. And she whispered to herself, so quietly no one could hear. I'm not here for them, I'm here for me. Just hold it together, just hold. But silence never answers back. And she knew, deep down, that the crucible hadn't finished with her. It was only sharpening the edge. Why did the crucible feel different now, as if an invisible line had been crossed? Because after the field trial, the cadets no longer looked at Vance with curiosity. They looked at her with something heavier, dependence. It wasn't spoken, and she never invited it, but it was there. In the way they glanced at her before making decisions, in the way they mirrored her breathing when their hands shook, in the way silence fell whenever she moved into a space. The crucible had always had leaders. Thorne had once filled that role, loud and arrogant, ruling by noise. But now leadership wore a different face. A quiet woman with scars across her knuckles and ghosts behind her eyes. And that terrified her. She hadn't come here to lead. She had come here to hide, to bury herself in repetition, in drills, in silence. But silence doesn't bury you, it unmasks you. Thorne felt it most. He trailed her during the next run, his strides matching hers. His lungs burned, sweat soaking his fatigues, but he kept his rhythm steady. Not to outpace her, not to impress her, just to learn. When they finished, collapsing in the dust, he forced himself to speak through ragged breath. "Chief, you ever get tired?" She didn't look at him. Her chest rose and fell evenly. "Everyone gets tired." "Not you, you don't show it." Her gaze flicked toward him, gray eyes steady, showing it doesn't help. He swallowed, nodding, filing the words away like scripture. That evening during weapons drills, she moved among the cadets silently, correcting small details without fanfare. A hand on a grip here, a soft exhale now there. She didn't ask permission. She didn't claim authority. She simply adjusted. And they let her. Because she was right every time. Jenkins, once Thorne's shadow, muttered under his breath after she corrected his stance. She doesn't even need to aim. She just knows. Ali, quieter now, whispered back, "Maybe that's what real is, knowing." The cadets nodded without speaking. Even they could feel it, the shift. But the shift brought weight. That night, Hayes summoned her again. She stood in his office, hands behind her back, posture rigid. He didn't speak immediately. He just studied her, the lamp casting shadows across his lined face. Finally, he said, "You've become their center." Her jaw tightened, not by choice. He leaned forward. "Doesn't matter, it's happened. They look to you now, every one of them, even Thorne." She said nothing. Silence was her armor. but Hayes pressed harder. "You can't stay hidden forever, Vance. They deserve to know who's guiding them." Her eyes flickered. "They don't need to know." "Yes," Hayes said firmly. "They do, because you're teaching them something the Academy never has, and if they're going to learn, they should understand the weight behind it." Her silence stretched, thick, brittle. Finally her voice came, low and raw. "If they knew the weight, sir, they wouldn't follow, they'd run." Hayes's eyes narrowed. He had heard confessions from men broken by war, seen eyes hollowed by guilt. He recognized that tone. He leaned back slowly. "Then maybe it's time to stop carrying it alone." She didn't answer. She saluted sharply, turned, and left. But his words clung to her like ash. "Stop carrying it alone." She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The ghosts pressed harder. She saw the faces again, the blood on her hands, the silence after the chaos. She heard her own voice lying to the dying, promising help that never came. Her hand clenched tight against her chest. She whispered, barely audible, "I can't, not yet." Across the barracks, Thorne sat awake too. He thought of her words in the woods. Not everything is solved with a fight. He thought of the way she had steadied the cadets, the way her silence had cut through panic. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel envy toward someone stronger. He felt respect. Respect that hurt because it showed him how small he'd been. The next morning, the cadets gathered on the mats for hand-to-hand drills. Croft called for volunteers. Thorne stood first, not with arrogance this time but with resolve. "I'll go." The cadets murmured, expecting another humiliation. But when Vance stepped forward opposite him, something was different. They circled, silence heavy. He lunged, but not wild, controlled. His strike was sharp, measured, and when she redirected it, he didn't stumble. He caught himself, breathing steady. She watched him carefully, testing. He struck again, slower, more disciplined. She countered, but his balance held. He didn't win, but he didn't collapse. After several exchanges, she stepped back. "Better." One word, that was all. But his chest surged with something he hadn't felt in weeks, pride that wasn't empty. The cadets noticed. The whispers shifted again. "Thorne's different. He's listening. She's changing him." And in that, they saw something more dangerous than her skill. They saw her influence breaking arrogance, reshaping character. By nightfall, her legend had grown again. The ghost wasn't just the one who dismantled Thorne in 3 seconds. She was the one who made him kneel to discipline, who turned him from noise into something sharper. But Vance hated it. She sat alone under the night sky, staring at the stars, her rifle across her lap. She hated being seen, hated being followed, hated being needed. Because every time they looked at her as if she was unshakable, she felt the truth pressing deeper. She was. Her silence was cracking. And soon, she knew, the truth would come out. Because ghosts don't stay buried forever. And when hers rose, she feared it wouldn't just change her. It would change them all. Why did the crucible feel like it held its breath on graduation morning? Because the silence she had brought into it had never left. The field was sharp with sunlight, the grass cut perfect, the flags lined in symmetry. Families filled the stands, cadets stood in formation, instructors lined the edges. It should have been like every other year, a ceremony, a celebration, a culmination. But it was not after her. Arrogance stood among them in formation, uniform crisp, her shoulders squared. On her chest gleamed the fresh bars of a second lieutenant, but they did not feel like triumph. They felt like weight. She hadn't come here to earn them. She hadn't come here to stand in the spotlight. She had come to disappear into silence, to bury ghosts. And yet, she had left the crucible louder than anyone, though she had barely spoken a word. General Hayes stood at the podium, his voice even but resonant. He spoke of discipline, of sacrifice, of the long road each cadet had walked. His eyes, however, flicked toward her more than once, as though the words carried double meaning. The cadets shifted, their eyes glancing toward her too. Some subtle, some not. The whispers had spread for months, growing into legend. The ghost. The chief. The one who had dismantled arrogance with silence. Thorne stood in formation too, his shoulders squared, his chin lower than it once was. He wore his new commission without the shine of pride he once had, but with something steadier, humility. He had lost his throne. He had lost the title of Golden Boy, but in losing it he had found something better himself. And he knew he owed it to her. The ceremony ended with applause, but it wasn't the noise that mattered. It was the stillness afterward, the way cadets lingered, the way their eyes followed her as if waiting for one final word. But she gave none. Later, in the quiet of the mess hall, Hayes found her alone at a table, her meal untouched. He sat across from her without invitation. "You're leaving," he said, not a question. She nodded once, assignment complete. He studied her face, the lines of strain that silence had carved. "You never told them." "They didn't need to know," she answered, her voice flat but heavy. Hayes leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Then let me ask you, Vance, why did you come here? Not the orders, the truth." For a long moment she said nothing. Her hand tightened around her fork, her eyes stayed down. Then finally, her voice came quiet, almost breaking. "Because silence at home was worse. Because the ghosts followed me back. Because every time I closed my eyes I saw them and I thought, maybe if I put myself back in the crucible, the ghosts would quiet." Her breath shuddered. "They haven't." Hayes's face softened. He had heard many confessions, but rarely one spoken so quietly, so raw. "They won't," he said simply. "But you've taught these cadets something no order, no drill, no speech could. You've taught them how to carry ghosts without letting them rule you. That's why you were here." She shook her head. "I didn't teach them, they just watched." "Sometimes," Hayes said, "watching is the only lesson they'll remember." The words sat heavy between them. That night she walked to the range one last time. The air was cool, the stars sharp. She loaded her rifle, aimed, and fired. Each shot rang clean, centered, perfect. And with each shot she whispered a name. The names of the brothers she'd lost, one by one, in silence broken only by gunfire. When the last round echoed, she lowered the rifle and let the quiet settle. Behind her, footsteps. "Thorne." He stopped a few paces back, not daring to intrude. His voice was low. "Chief." She turned, her face unreadable. He swallowed hard, then spoke. "I wanted to thank you for breaking me, for showing me what I couldn't see myself. I thought strength was noise. You showed me its silence, and I'll never forget that." For a moment she said nothing. Then she gave a single nod, the kind that carried weight heavier than words. "You'll do fine, cadet," she said softly, "if you remember to listen more than you speak." He nodded, throat tight. When she walked past him, he didn't turn. He just stood there, listening to the silence she left behind. Weeks later, the crucible carried her legend like scripture. The mat where she dismantled Thorne in 3 seconds became sacred ground, cadets pausing before sparring as if to honor it. A still frame from the security footage, her calm face mid-throw, was pinned to the bulletin board, no caption needed. Croft began every new class with the clip, Thorne's arrogance, her silence, the 3-second takedown. Then he would face the cadets and say, "Your first lesson, never underestimate the quiet one. The true warrior doesn't need to speak. Their silence will teach you more than any voice." And the cadets would whisper her name, not in mockery, not in rumor, but in reverence. The ghost, the chief, Vance. Our Vance herself was gone, reassigned, her path leading somewhere unknown. She didn't crave the legend she left. She didn't seek the whispers. She carried only her ghosts, the weight of silence, and the scars etched deeper than skin. But the crucible had been changed forever. Because sometimes, one person walks into a room and doesn't raise their voice, doesn't fight for attention, doesn't demand respect. And yet they change everything. Sometimes the strongest voice is no voice at all. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.